The people I find who are the really successful entrepreneurs think less and do more. They jump in. They don't plan. They don't write up business plans or pitch decks. They immediately try and figure out some way to figure out whether the idea that popped in their head actually is real by colliding it with reality. And most people do the opposite. Their ideas in their head, and it's so beautiful in their head, and it can grow in their head, and it can become this multinational thing, and they never actually take it out and collide it. They keep planning and plotting, and they base it all on unrealistic assumptions. And when they finally do try and bring it to the real world, of course, it fails. And they could have found that out much, much, much earlier. So number one is that predisposition for action.
Welcome to Grow Think Tank. This is the one and only place where you will get insight from the founders and the CEOs of the fastest growing privately held companies. I am the host. My name is Gene Hammett. I help leaders and their teams navigate the defining moments of their growth. Are you ready to grow? Scaling your company fast doesn't mean you have to do it alone. And in fact, you can learn from others. One of the best ways I know to really understand what it takes to be an entrepreneur, what it takes to be a leader, and to scale a company fast is to learn from companies that have done it before you. Today, our special guest is Marc Randolph. Marc is one of the co-founders of Netflix, and he started many companies before that, but Netflix is the big one you probably can think of. You probably missed that opportunity in the stock market just like I did. But one of the things I love most about this conversation was this fact. I asked him about when do you start focusing on culture as a company is scaling? And he said from the very beginning. I'll leave it inside the interview about why that's so important, but inside he actually lays out the core things that leaders must do, get right, and things that they must avoid as they're scaling a company fast. And this will help you scale your company fast. So Marc Randolph is a fantastic guest here on the show, and he mentions the podcast. So I'll go ahead and mention that right now. That Will Never Work. That's the same name of his book. And it really comes from the phrase that so many people told him that would never work to be able to create a company like Netflix. And even his own wife talked about that would never work. So if you want to tune in some of the conversations that Marc has with other startup entrepreneurs, you can go check out his podcast at That Will Never Work. Now here's the interview with Marc. Marc, how are you?
Well, thanks, Gene. Thank you for speaking with me today.
Excited to have you on the Growth Think Tank podcast to talk about growth, entrepreneurship, leadership, and some very interesting things you're up to.
Well, I think about those things all the time, so it'll be fun to chat with a kindred spirit.
Well, I've already let our audience know a little bit about you. So tell us something maybe we don't know already about a co-founder of Netflix, someone who put Blockbuster out of business. What are you really up to these days?
Well, my whole thing is to work as little as I can and still be effective. My whole shtick is balance, actually. That's what I've been struggling with ever since I was in my 20s, is not just what does it take to be an effective business leader, but also how do you be an effective business leader at the same time have time for the other things that are important in a balanced life. So if I told you the things I spend time on, they'd be all over the place.
Excellent. You're probably a lot like me. I've got a lot of sort of hobbies that I'm into, but I do love what I'm doing. So it doesn't quite feel like work. I'm so excited to talk to you today. Let's let our audience know a little bit about kind of your background. You were a co-founder at Netflix with Reed Hastings, right?
Yes, but of course I didn't do that until I was in my late 30s. Netflix was actually my 6th startup. So I've pretty much been doing what I did then and what I still do, for nearly 40 some odd years. It's, when I started it wasn't even a thing. They weren't these people called entrepreneurs. I mean, there were people who were entrepreneurs, but they weren't talked about that way, and there certainly weren't university classes. You couldn't major in it. There weren't movies. It was just this compulsion that I and other people like me had to fix problems or create things that needed to get created. And that ultimately, I think, is the genesis for most of the successful companies you see.
Sometimes I beat myself up because I may be a little bit younger than you. I just turned 50 and I graduated from college in 92, which put me right on the kind of cusp of entrepreneurship was not very fashionable back then. A few people, of course, started big businesses and you had some of those big stories, but it wasn't what the craze it is today. When you
So
talk
were your parents pushing you to be a doctor or a lawyer or a banker? It was certainly one of those three things.
My parents didn't push me at all. I pushed myself and I got a degree in engineering. So,
Ah, there you go.
but I will tell you, I didn't actually become an engineer. I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I didn't have an idea. And so my thought for the first 10 years was I'm going to get the skills that will prepare me for when I do launch my business, which I launched in 2001.
Well, I was a geology major, if that's any consolation. So you don't see me traipsing around the oil fields at all. I never did. That was just, in fact, geology major was for the exact same reasons you start companies. Is because I found that interesting.
Yeah.
I said, wow, the geology majors get to go on these field trips all the time. That looks awesome. Count me in for that.
I want to ask you a question about leadership inside of startups. When you're looking and talking to companies that you see that have a potential for being successful, what are the qualities that those leaders typically demonstrate?
I've been doing the starting for a long time, but also been kind of doing the mentoring and the working with early stage companies for probably 15 some odd years. And I've come to the conclusion that I can't tell. I can't tell which companies are going to be successful because so much of it is a random walk, is that you start off with an idea that's so early, you have to make all these bets. But there certainly are some things I think that increase the chances that someone's going to have a good shot at it. And there's probably two or three, in my opinion. And probably the biggest one is what I call a predisposition to action. The people I find who are the really successful entrepreneurs think less and do more. They jump in, they don't plan, they don't write up business plans or pitch decks. They immediately try and figure out some way to figure out whether the idea that popped in their head actually is real by colliding it with reality. And most people do the opposite. Their ideas in their head, and it's so beautiful in their head, and it can grow in their head, and it can become this multinational thing, and they never actually take it out and collide it. They keep planning and plotting, and they base it all on unrealistic assumptions. And when they finally do try and bring it into the real world, of course, it fails. And they could have found that out much, much, much earlier. So number one is that predisposition for action. There's also a persistence quality, which is people view setbacks not as disappointments, not as failures, but more as learning opportunities. It's viewed as this puzzle. And each time you try something, you learn something. And even if at the worst case, you learn your idea that thing you tried didn't work, but that almost never is it a complete failure that way. It's always, well, that didn't work, but wow, look what they did do. And then I'll give you one more, which is that the people I see who are perhaps the most successful blend these two almost contradictory personality traits. They have this tremendous self-confidence because they're the type of people who, like myself, heard that will never work thousands of times. And they have to believe, no, I am going to make it work. But they have to pair that self-confidence with this ability to listen and hear, to ask really good questions and absorb the answer. They don't need to do what someone else says. They don't need to believe what someone else believes, but they need to be able to factor that into their thinking and really come to a conclusion and say, is that person true? Is that what they're saying true? Not true? Should I change what I'm doing? And then when something else becomes self-evidently right, to instantly being able to drop that previously strongly held conviction and not dig in on the ego and just move on to what now is the new self-evidently right path.
Now, a few minutes ago, Marc just talked about the importance of self-confidence. He talked about blending that with the ability to listen. And it's so rare. He mentioned it. I want to put a spotlight on it here for you today. Because when you have self-confidence, typically you don't want to listen to others. You believe you know the right way. When you have the correct blend of self-confidence and the ability to listen to others, you have a mixture that is rare, but also powerful. When you think about listening to others, it's not just listening to respond. It's truly listening to who they are, making sure they feel understood. But the self-confidence comes when you don't no longer doubt yourself. When you have the level of self-confidence that you need to as a leader, you can push forward beyond any challenges you have. But you can also lend that self-confidence to others. You can help lift them up. You can ask questions. You can coach them to a place where they really are empowered to move forward. That is real leadership. Back to Marc. Love all that. And I love your perspective on these things. When you were writing the book that will never work, who said those words to you? Was it one person that stands out, or was it a lot of people?
Oh, it was a lot of people. I mean, listen, I was pitching this ridiculous idea to do video rental by mail at a time when Blockbuster has 9,000 stores, when at least apparently video on demand or streaming or download is right around the corner. So everyone said that'll never work. I mean, my investors said that'll never work. My employees said that'll never work. Even my wife said that will never work. But listen, you've been in this game before. We've all had that experience where, you come rushing down all excited and there's my great idea. Oh, that's ridiculous. And who knows? What I've learned is, you just can't tell. There's no way to know if it's a good idea or a bad idea. You can think it to death. The only way to find out is to do it.
I can remember with my wife being a subscriber when you guys raised the pricing. I think it was $1 or maybe $1.50, and you were going to split off the pricing. You can choose either just mail or we're going to start the streaming thing. And I was like, this is a big thing. And we talk about it every once in a while about why didn't we invest back then?
I was talking to my son about that just this morning, because he's the Robin Hood generation. I don't mean the, steal from the rich and give to the needy. I mean the trading app. But it's been fantastic, if for no other reason that it's really, he's 25. It's just stimulated this whole interest in him and investments. And I'm trying to reinforce him to not get sucked into the whole, day trading, charting, what I consider all the bullshit things. But there's value things. And I use that example. I go, when Netflix announced it was spinning off Quickster, as they called it, and it was so poorly handled, I'm not denying that, and it caused the stock to tank. I think it dropped 2/3 of its price. The fundamentals hadn't changed. I mean, it still had the hearts and minds of its subscribers. But more importantly, splitting the companies, even though poorly handled, was actually more likely to make the company successful, not less likely, because it allowed them to focus everything on what was clearly going to be the future, which is the streaming business. And to have the courage to say we're going to split these apart and basically orphan this legacy business, which is not going to go anyplace, in order to focus everything we have on streaming, that was courage. And I said, that's what separates a great investor, is having that vision to recognize that when everyone else thinks is a bad idea, in fact, is a brilliant idea. So
as you probably can imagine,
I bought stock too. That was, I think it dropped to $60, and I don't even know where it's trading now, up in the 300 or 400, something like that.
500 something.
See, there you go. I'm still out of date.
It's interesting that you said investors are able to look at something and see the vision and see the potential there and have the courage to move forward. But that's exactly what entrepreneurs do as well, right?
Absolutely. We just don't have the advantage. We don't have the advantage of being able to get 6 months in and go, oh, I don't like this business. I think I'm going to sell and move on to something else. We're all in. We are those people who are basically the trapped animals who, no matter how desperate things look, we have to figure out a way to make these things work. And that's a different characteristic.
I got to share something with you. And I don't know where you'll come down on this idea, but you've worked with a lot of startups and they're younger companies. They probably don't have hundreds or thousands of employees yet. But a lot of the people I've been on the show are the founders and CEOs of fast growth companies like the Inc. 5000. You're probably familiar with that.
Sure. Yes, of course.
I ask them what I call the impossible question. And again, I don't know what you would say here, but I ask them, as a fast growth leader, what's more important, your customers or your employees?
Well, your customers. I mean, there's no question about that. This is going to sound very harsh. Your employees are totally in service to the customer. And that's at every level. I mean, at the highest level, if you don't do what your customers want, first and foremost, you're going to be out of business. And that doesn't help the employees any. Great. We all are now on the street. But more importantly, the needs of the customers change, which means I have to constantly say, do I have the right people in the right seats? And if I'm saying, no, I have this certain set of people and this certain set of skills, then what I'm trying to do is force fit a company into a market. That's not only a recipe for disaster for that company, it's a recipe for disaster for any company. It's what gets the big companies in trouble because they see which way the world's going. These aren't stupid people, but they're locked into a business model. They're locked into an employee set. They're locked into all kinds of things. And if you're really going to be doing the right thing for your business, you've got to do what the customer wants. I mean, that just seems self-evident to me.
So I'm not trying to be belligerent here when I go against this, but
oh, please. That's what makes these things great.
Yeah. Feedback that comes back in 94% of the time, and this is across about 500 plus interviews, is 94% will say it's employee first.
Oh, come on. Fair enough. Listen, that's what makes horse racing. But listen, listen, you know the Netflix culture. You've certainly talked about that before.
Yep.
And certainly from the outside, it appears hard-ass, but I'm not sure. Let's see, I'll give you a perfect example. So when Netflix was, building search, okay? We went out and found the best people in the world at search, people who are passionate about search, who were incredible. And they built this amazing system. But then it's built, and those are no longer the right people. And if the customers don't want, they don't want us to become a search company. There's other things that customers want from us. I mean, and that happens over and over. Oh, an even better example, when we were building the streaming infrastructure, we got the very, very best people in the world who lived and breathed that, and they built this amazing infrastructure until all of a sudden we decided, this doesn't make sense for us to be doing this ourselves. AWS, Amazon, can do this much better. That's their core business. That infrastructure piece isn't really the core piece of us. We're about the content. And so what do you say? No, we're going to stay in this business because we've got to keep giving these people the type of work they really know. You have to have the honest discussion and say, I'm sorry, that we have to do something different for the customers. And this is just not a good place for you to work anymore. Let's find you a company where you can do this thing you're passionate about. I can give you so many examples of this. We could spend the whole rest of this time talking about this because I am not going to give in. If you don't go the direction of where the customer's going, listen, I take it back. I want all the big companies to stick to their guns because that is what allows all the startups that I mentor to be able to take down these big established companies.
Let me give you some context around this because we can kind of talk about this just for a moment. The question reads again, as a leader of this company, what's more important? And what these leaders typically say back is like, I can only push this and scale it so far myself. I need employees to think for themselves, to feel empowered, to feel a sense of ownership about what we're creating. And when that happens, they're able to put the customer first as a company. And so they want to create a space where people are sharing those ideas, they're innovating, not getting caught up into failures and things like that, but they're pushing forward. Does that change anything for you? I'm not trying to change your mind, but do you understand the context of it?
Yes, it's the way you phrase it, though, which is more important.
Yep.
And I'm never going to back off from the fact that the customer is more important than anybody, including me. I'll surrender my own job if I'm not there. In fact, I did at Netflix when I realized what's right for the customer is not necessarily for me to lead this company. But that's different than slightly the twist you put before, which is I'm not saying I'm not going to spend huge amounts of effort empowering the employees. That's critical. It's not like you don't care. It's different. In fact, I'd say that the cultural things that I put in place at my company are entirely about, what's now referred to as this freedom and responsibility. I do everything I can to create a culture, to strip away rules, to try and allow people to truly come to work, to feel empowered, to make decisions, to be trusted, to feel they're running a business. But those two things can happen at the same time. And we're talking about when the two conflict, when all of a sudden someone's not right for what the company needs right now. The analogy that Netflix has used, this is not one that I came up with, it came after I left, was that, we're not a family. we're a sports team and we're not a little league team where everyone plays and everyone gets a trophy. We are a professional sports team where the objective is to win. And the coach's job is to make sure the very, very best player is in each position. And your obligation to the shortstop is the second baseman's. He's a great guy. He can't turn the ball play, but come on, we're a team, we're a family. No, your responsibility to the shortstop is to put in place the best possible second baseman you can. So, but they're both. We should shift. I'm happy to talk about corporate culture and how critical it is to empower people and how you have to. Listen. It's not my job is not to make decisions as a leader. In fact, Reed Hastings, now prides himself on how long he can go without making a decision, and the whole thing is set up to say the manager's job only is not to make decisions. The manager's job is to make sure the right people are in the right seats, and which is the hiring and it's the firing, and to make sure they all have all the context and information they need to be empowered to make independent decisions. And we believe that giving employees that is the most compelling thing we can do to make them want to come to work, to want to work at our companies, to not want to leave, to feel bought in to making the company successful.
Now, hold on for a second. Marc just said something really interesting, and we need to put that spotlight on this time. He talked about you don't want to create a culture where people feel like a family. You want one where people feel like it's a professional sports team. I see a lot of people make this mistake, and frankly, I've made this mistake too, that I want a family. But a family is not exactly what you're looking for. You want to make sure you put the right people in the right positions to grow the company. And that may change over time. You want to make sure you're pushing the boundaries of those people. You're challenging them to grow. And you don't always challenge family members the same way. But if people feel too comfortable, that family kind of culture, it can be dangerous. The professional sports culture, on the other hand, is something that allows people to really step up and be their full potential. If you can create that as a leader, you have a very powerful way to engage others and for others to hold each other accountable to everything that's around them. I love this analogy. I want to make sure we put a spotlight on it for you today so that you can make some decisions about your culture and how you're moving forward as a leader. Now back to Marc. And so now we're back kind of aligned together. When you think about culture and you are mentoring today's startups, how early do you actually get them to start thinking about creating that kind of culture so that the company can win?
Well, I do it from the very beginning. And as I think I mentioned earlier, I just have a podcast coming out, which is essentially my mentoring calls with early stage entrepreneurs. These are people from all over the world and all kinds of crazy businesses, but it almost always comes back to culture. Because when I started doing these calls, I thought questions are going to be about technology or about go-to-market strategies, but most of them are about human elements of being a leader. I mean, things like, how do I get along with my co-founder? How do I motivate my team? How do I find the right people? And the analogy that I often use is that when you're an early stage company, there just isn't the time for command and control. You have too many things to do and you have too few resources. And the only thing you can do is try and find people who can have great judgment and can make independent decisions so that you can tell them, you see that mountain peak over there? I'll meet you there in 3 weeks. And here's what I need you to have when you get there. And then I'm not going to think about it again. I'm going to trust that they'll have enough responsibility to make damn sure they are there on time with what they need to deliver. But I'm not going to try and second guess what they have to overcome. I can't anticipate it. Do they have to cross a river? Do they have to go over a peak? Are they carrying heavy weight? They'll figure it out. And that's, in my opinion, pretty easy. Most companies who are really early do that. What gets you in trouble is when you get bigger, when someone's late and you have to go, okay, we all need status reports. And everyone goes, oh, someone overspends and you go, okay, we now need expense reports. Everyone goes, oh. And what I try and coach people to do is I go, don't build a system to protect yourself from people with bad judgment. Build a system that's designed for people with good judgment. You know that the Netflix is that famous, I'm sure you're familiar with the Netflix vacation policy.
Yeah.
There isn't one. And you know what their expense policy is? There isn't one. There are no policies because they've systematically said, what does this help? Is this guidance for people's judgment? Wouldn't it be smarter just to hire people with great judgment? And it turns out that that's what people like. But so yes, from the very beginning, I'm working with not just the lip service of it, not just let's all sit down and craft a visionary statement of what we want our culture to be. I go, culture is who you are. Culture is how you act. It's not what you say. It's what you, as anyone who has kids knows, it's not what you say, it's what you do. And so you've got to build a culture which is true to you, and you've got to walk the walk. And that's something that people need confidence, they need support, and they need some judgment. And you'll see on the podcast, I'm really trying to give people specific cases. So rather than sitting here and lecturing, let's talk about your specific circumstance here. You're having a hard time with this receptionist even, and let's talk about how you might structure that job, how you might communicate with that person to instill that sense of judgment and responsibility and freedom, even at every level of the company. It's not a VP thing, it's every level.
I want to mention that podcast again, because I think a lot of people listening in now are probably looking for content that they could really latch onto. So That Will Never Work. Same as title as your book, but that's a podcast where you're recording mentoring calls with early stage startups, right?
Exactly right. And people will resonate because these stories are so common. One person, when it came out just a little while ago, this person's building a 66,000 square foot indoor adventure park, with rappelling and zip lines in Texas with alcohol, of course. And the challenge isn't the actual construction of the management. He's going, this is going to be open 80 hours a week. How do I maintain some balance in my life? How do I keep my family and my kids knowing me while I'm running this business? And that is not something they teach you in business school, but that's something that I've certainly struggled with for 20 or 30 years. And those are the type of things we can coach somebody through. But other ones are, another woman, for example, has a online erotic art gallery. And her challenge is the marketing one, because you can certainly say, oh, social media. But she goes, no, that's a dangerous line, because I could build this huge following and then by one slip, all of a sudden I'm canceled. So we began talking through what could we do to leverage this tension and perhaps find some different way for you to call attention to yourself. They're really, I get so much out of it because it's so interesting, helping. It feeds the entrepreneur in me to feel like I'm back sitting around the table, solving really cool problems with really smart people.
So Marc, I appreciate you being here today. I want to bring us home with this one thing. You said something about, being able to put people in the right seats and be able to see a vision, say, I see a mountaintop, I'll meet you there in 3 weeks. What are the real skills of leadership, those soft skills that you were mentioning, that are necessary for people to be able to, get there on their own?
I firmly believe, for me, it's all about not getting in the way. You do have to make sure, I used to call it loosely coupled, but tightly aligned. It's a leadership style which says, let's all be clear where we're going, but I'm not going to tell you how to do your job. I'm going to find people who want that sense of responsibility, but want the freedom to come to work every day thinking I'm solving problems on my own. And my job is to get barriers out of the way. My job is to make it clear where we're all going. My job is to surround them with other people that they respect. And if I do that, there's really nothing we can't accomplish.
Marc, thanks again for being here on the podcast, talking about your work, your experience, your story and journey. Really appreciate it. And again, that podcast is That Will Never Work. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. You can tell it's a subject I'm passionate about.
What an incredible interview. I really love Marc's attention to detail on all the details that leaders must pay attention to. When you think about your own journey as leadership, you must get some things right. Some things that you focus on aren't so important. When he talked about, taking action and talking about the importance of culture in the early stages of companies, I hope you took notes. I hope you really understood what that means for your own company. My job is to help leaders go beyond what they believe is possible. I've been working with founders and CEOs for the last 10 years. I'd love to help you with your company. If you have a question about where you should focus your energy, where you should spend your time, which project is more important than others, all of those things are things I help my clients figure out, because I help them understand themselves and really get to the core of the issues so they can really understand themselves to move forward with confidence and courage like they've never had before. That's my job as an executive coach to founders and CEOs of fast growth companies. And when you think about leadership, when you think about growth, think of Growth Think Tank. As always, lead with courage. We'll see you next time.